All right, chapters 8 and 9 of that Hideous Strength. All of these times where I have suggested that the plot's going to really start to it's only going to ramp up and build each time until it sort of feels like it's off to the races. Presumably, we're starting to feel that, if not even more acceleration after last week, where the riots actually occurred. So we're going to try for our two chapters. That's a lot to go over. So we're just going to kind of hit high points of the plot. If there's any particular questions about things or things to spend more time on or reflect on, please let me know. Um, so we begin with the fallout of the end of the riots. So the riots occurred the night before. As we remember, Jane had been basically arrested by Hardcastle and some of her nice cops, and they were in the process of torturing her. They she had burned her with cigarettes. I mean, this is it goes. It gets so bizarrely awful almost out of nowhere. But this is something that I think we are starting to see the mask of nice slip. It slipped very dramatically over these few chapters where earlier on you can have kind of a bad feeling about something. Oh, this organization seems like they're a little too vague, or maybe like they have a little too much power, or maybe like there's some kind of nefarious undercurrent. Well, it's not an undercurrent anymore. They've gone from just kind of being jerks, buying up land and making big messes and tearing things up, to manufacturing riots in order to take control, to a whole plan that is being laid out now. We're seeing the plan logistically as far as after the riots, them taking basically a martial law. But what is that to lead to? And now, finally, with these two chapters, we are starting to see the grand design of nice, and it's not at all what they have. Oh, there you go. It's not at all nice, and it's not at all what they have been portraying to the public. The real goal of nice is nothing less than total domination of humanity, the destruction of organic life. Um, what is today this is a movement that exists that has now been redefined with a new term: transhumanism. Transhumanism is the outgrowth of these more modern era ideas from the 50s and so on. This is like the stories about how Walt Disney is cryogenically frozen somewhere in order to be revived once the science catches up to cure his cancer. That that sentiment, which first pops up in the mid 20th century, what we refer to as the modern era, modernity having inherent in its outlook this sense of scientific progress is wrapped up into moral progress, is wrapped up into the progress of humanity. And basically, we will eventually solve all problems through industry, technology, the scientific method, so on and so forth. So, this is being laid out very, very, very overtly within these two chapters, especially when we finally experience the head and Philostrato explaining to Mark very coldly and very frankly that he is after nothing other than the eradication of all organic life. What is important is the mind, whatever that is. And everything about the body is unhygienic. It's weird. It's gross. It's uncontrollable and chaotic. Everything from the sexual act to people's sense of freedom and liberty are directly connected to things like disease and filth and scum and all of the parts of you can go out and look at nature and you can see beauty, or you can see germs and the wild course of disease and everything else. We were so worried about the spread of COVID in 2020 and 2021. It was not at all uncommon to see people walking outside around no one else and wearing a mask. People driving alone in their own car and wearing a mask. We had this sense that nature was out to get us, and that if we could have sterilized the world, we might have actually tried. As a matter of fact, there was hand sanitizer every 10 feet. Everything, we had protocols once the church was allowed to reopen, that all the ways that we had to spray down and disinfect every surface after every contact. And there was this sense of, throughout humanity, and that's one of the kind of the classic narrative foundations, man versus nature. Like say Moby Dick, man versus nature. But that nature is at best indifferent and at worst openly antagonistic to human life. Like if we don't fight nature back, it's going to get us. And to some degree, there's truth to that. That there are diseases out there, there are predators out there. Just the course of human life means age and decay and eventual death. But this sense that somehow the mind in its abstract sense, and again, these are all materialists who at some point would say the only thing that counts is the material physical nature. If we recall from the earlier books, if you have the chance to read them, and they hail Weston, the one of the antagonists of both books, and really the prime antagonist of the second book, the one who is basically possessed directly by the devil, becomes the unman who hunts Ransom down. And it's Weston's bite that's the wound that Ransom, the Pendragon, the head in this book, still bears. That he was a materialist who cared nothing even really for people, but this abstract concept of humanity must persevere. We must conquer the stars for the species to propagate. And it's not really about any individual person. It's not even about himself. He basically warns the Martians who want to eliminate this threat, that you can kill me if you want, but more will come after me. We cannot be stopped. Progress cannot be stopped. Humanity must persevere. It becomes so abstract at that point. What is humanity if not people? But the concept of people not only gets lost in this, it's now being overtly rejected. What makes people people is gross, it's uncontrollable, it's chaotic, and it ought to be sterilized. It ought to be disinfected to the point of its destruction. What we are after is the absolute control to basically do away with everyone and everything. So that even if the world was a barren rock, but say one computer preserved this perfect singular mind, that would be the proper outcome of all of human history. These are the words of supervillains, and the amazing convergence has happened where the strict materialist, there is nothing supernatural, it is only the physical, everything is a chemical process, everything is a function of physics and of mathematics, there is no God. That has gone to such an extreme, it's actually circled back around to become nothing but the deeply supernatural. This ethereal sense of the mind, which is the utmost and must be preserved to the expense of everything else. What is that other than a supernatural metaphysical claim? It's not about chemicals and equations at that point. They have fully embraced the thought that there is something existential outside of the human body that must be preserved. And this ultimate end goal, this mind that consumes all others until it is final, is not just diabolical, it's straight up demonic. So if we've been waiting for some theological lines to be drawn, here they come. So as we begin on chapter 8, in this aftermath of the riot, we get a glimpse into nice kind of behind the curtain. Wither and Hardcastle arguing with each other. Hardcastle's basically in trouble because she didn't bring Jane in. And your guess from early on, Mary, that Mark has been a pawn all along. What Nice has really been interested in was Jane all along. They bring Mark in, and Wheeler even says, what did he say about like we
didn't have to bother or something.
Right. Basically, we've had to put up with this idiot.
Yeah, embarrassment.
Yes, he's an embarrassment. Now, Mark has actually done some decent work for them. Like these articles that he's been writing are exactly what they want him to do, and he's apparently done it with great skill. But ultimately, they see him as a vain idiot. And to some degree, he is. If he wasn't kind of foolish and immature and vain, he never would have gotten in this position. But he gets sucked in so easily because it appeals to his vanities. And in his immaturity and in his kind of shallowness, he gets caught up in this position where he is easy for them to manipulate. And now everything they're impressing upon him at this point is, you have to bring Jane, you have to bring Jane, you have to bring Jane. And for the first time, I detect a spark of nobility within Mark. For the first time, he is thinking about the well-being of someone other than himself, even to his own expense. I wish I had never married her just so that she would be safe from this mess that I'm in. And it kind of feels like the sentiment of a husband for the first time. Mark is in way past his neck at this point. He's in such deep water. But I think we get the first hint. Maybe, just maybe, it's not too late. They have tried to manipulate him as much as possible, even as he is horrified by this basically command at this point to go get your wife. He's trying to do everything he can to run away. He literally runs out into the night thinking that he can escape. And again, his immaturity has this kind of daydream playing out that he's going to run into Jane's arms. They're going to move away to France, and it's going to be like everything is, everything's worked out happily ever after. And then we get this creepy, almost unexplained, how in the world is Wither out here in the dark on the grounds? Everything that we've said about the nefarious nature of Nice, understand that just how nefarious and diabolical it is, we're still finding out every chapter just how unnatural and evil it really is. We've also now spent more time with the company at St. Anne's. We've spent a good bit of time with Mr. McPhee. Mr. McPhee represents something that is very important personally to C.S. Lewis, but he also wants as a part of the narrative structure. So C.S. Lewis, who was really trained in kind of the classical modes of education and of thinking, of logic, um, will revert back to a character who is either Scottish or Northern Irish as a homage to a tutor in his life that basically changed the course of his life. He was sent away as a boy. This is after the death of his mother and his father really not knowing how to process that grief or help him process his grief. As Lewis's young faith is sort of drained away, he is sent to study with someone that he refers to as the Great Knob, who is a Scottish atheist, but apparently the son or the grandson of a Presbyterian elder of some sort, of some notoriety, but basically drums into Lewis a lot of these phrases that he'll put in McPhee's mouth about, I don't have any beliefs, I have facts and observations and whatever. So his insistence is always logic, logic, logic. And as a boy, he got this very practical and kind of hard education on how to organize your thoughts so that you didn't speak like small talk was nonsense. If you're going to say something, it must have meaning. And if it has meaning, it has been rigorously tested in advance. And so these principles of logical thinking as a as a as kind of a fundamental assertion we see in McPhee, but will also appear in other characters of Lewis's writings, preserved in Professor Kirk in the Narnia books. Lewis loved the Great Knock. He was grateful for all of his life for what this man had invested in him in the shaping of how to see the world and how to organize your own thoughts. And so we've got McPhee in here who may very well be an agnostic or an atheist, which might seem kind of out of place within this group. But even the director, Ransom, has said he is our resident skeptic. And that's important. We need someone who is always kind of pressing to make sure that these aren't, like our emotions and our desires don't ever pull us too far away from the concrete truth. Every organization needs a numbers person. Every organization needs someone who has that kind of way of seeing things very black and white, very mechanically, that column A equals column B. I can go through the details and I can remain focused and not lose track because pennies count. And that seems to be McPhee's function here. He's very amenable to the group, even though he kind of seems like an outsider or at least an odd fit. But this is a group, especially at this time of Britain, that really represents kind of an odd combination of unexpected people. We get, and this is probably a little stranger for us, but we get some real British classicist perspectives in this. Like Jane is still kind of confused about Ivy Maggs because she's a working class servant girl. And clearly Jane is from kind of a different social strata. And the fact that we're all in here together, she's trying to figure out how's that supposed to work. And the funny thing, I mean, there's an assumption on her part. They're like, oh, I guess she's your servant, right? Like, well, no, we're all kind of in this together. Well, that's weird. And the democratic egalitarian nature of America, we have to kind of translate this, I think. I have no idea if Britain's still like this at some degree or not, and maybe this is more of a vestige of the past. And I think this is probably even changing at the time. Even in the 50s, that was probably, kind of something that was on the way out. But the social mores of the time are kind of coming into play here. Like Jane and Camilla are peers. Like this works, this fits. I totally understand this. But even the Dimbles are kind of over here, and Mrs. Maggs, she's kind of over there, and she and Miss Ironwood is in a completely different place from us. And so there's a kind of a melting pot here that I think we don't necessarily think twice about, but it's probably trickier for them, or at least for her. You know, Jane is still thinking in a particular thing. Now, again, this is not explicit at the time, but the building blocks are being laid. This is a Christian community that's being laid out. There is an old saying that I'm very fond of, and I have zero idea who said it. The ground beneath the cross is exceedingly level, meaning no one stands above or below anyone else. As we approach the cross of Christ, no one is on a hill higher up and more important, and no one is sitting in a ditch and like less important or insignificant. The celebrity, the king, the poor beggar, the everyday person, everyone stands exactly the same. And this is something that Jane has not understood. But we will see this only more and more. That what is happening at St. Anne's is supposed to be kind of a precursor of this is the body of Christ within the early church. This is like the book of Acts, where all the believers shared things in common, and they the numbers were added to daily. This is Acts chapter 2. So she's coming around to this. Even Mr. Bultitude is a part of that, which I'm assuming you caught as he was referred to offhandedly earlier on. She meets them. He's a bear. They have a bear living at the house.
Figure that out.
Yes.
I thought at first they must be a big dog.
Yeah, big. No, he's a bear.
Bear.
But again, Ransom's adventures in Paralandra has so connected him to the purity of creation. Remember that Paralandra, the second book, as he is traveling to Venus, he is really charged to stand in a very young world, an unfallen world, basically Eden. What would happen if we were in Eden and Adam and Eve have the apple in their hand, and the serpent is convincing them how they ought to take a bite, and we're there with the job of preventing it? What do you do? What do you say? And that was really that second book. Now, he succeeds, and he really succeeds in some unexpected ways, but paradise is preserved in the second book. And being a part of like a perfect unfallen creation, animals, plants, people, everything in harmony as they were designed to be, Ransom has somehow brought some of that with him. We've seen that in his youthful appearance. We saw that in the weird little thing about the mice eating the crumbs. And even a wild bear can somehow live in and out of their house in harmony. Almost like he's like a big doofus Disney bear. You know, like Ivy Maggs is having to swat him with a broom to keep him out of the cupboards and stuff. And it's a little more comical than anything else. But this is a bear. This is a wild dang animal. And so this is, again, it's trying to give us this precursor. What's happening at St. Anne's? It's not just a story of a handful of people. This is like the way things ought to be, preserved in a tiny, faithful remnant, and what might be the last bastion to stand against the literal forces of evil. To make a comparison to the work of his friend J.R.R. Tolkien, it is not through a magnificent, mighty army that the Dark Lord Sauron is defeated. It's through the two tiny hobbits, the small, the weak, the seemingly insignificant, and the unimportant, who brave amazing dangers who destroy the powerful ring. The downfall doesn't come through armies and horses and swords and spears. It comes through these two friends who basically rely on each other. And the little guy, the ordinary folks, the simple people with the simple goodness of life is what actually defeats the greatest of darknesses. And that's kind of what's being laid out here. We have a few oblique references that may seem very confusing now. And I'm just telling you, they will get explained. But like a lot of this book, he's trusting us to just hang on.
Yeah.
We have, a lot of contemporary media spoon feeds us plot points, and we complain if we get a little lost. And when we see a really smart movie or a book or a show or something that kind of drops the hints but doesn't spell it out, but that ties it up in the end, and everything does get explained, we go, wow, they did a really good job. And it kind of stands out because we don't see that much anymore. Usually, plot points are very simple and they're hammered home and they're very deliberate because we don't even watch media the same way that we used to. We have it on in the background, and if it's not big and bold, we lose track. I always put the subtitles on now, just because it helps me hear them. And I have the tendency, I don't fully pay attention as much as I used to, and I have to kind of, wait, what do they say, and what's going on? A strange and a somewhat subtle after effect of Hollywood movies becoming very, very expensive, and a global market, which, Hollywood movies, let's say in the 60s and 70s, made their way overseas, especially popular movies, because American culture was seen as cool and everything else. But Hollywood movies now are directly intended to have a worldwide market. When we hear about a movie, this movie made X amount of dollars, they're always talking about the global box office. So how do you have a successful movie that can be effectively communicated in America, in France, in China, in Senegal, in the Ukraine? You have to keep it big and broad. You can't get too deep into something that only one culture is going to understand, only one country. You can't get too deep into inside jokes. You can't get too deep into things that require a lot of subtlety, because if you're translating into multiple languages, you have to have it kind of as broad as possible. And when these movies cost a ridiculous amount of money to make, well, they have to recoup that, and you recoup that by having as many people as possible. And how do you have as many people as possible? By making it as broad and general as possible. But this book is saying it's all going to come together, but it's not going to be real broad and general. I'm going to trust you, Lewis, as an author would be saying, to follow, even if you don't totally get it. Pick up the breadcrumbs where you can, but these threads will all come together. Now, I'm going to connect a few dots this will become more explicit, but I think it might help to kind of give you some preview. In the same manner that we've talked about St. Anne's being like a faithful remnant, you might consider. Like, this is the way that the world ought to be. This is the way the church ought to be. Even though it's really tiny, it's the seed with the hopes that it will grow and spread. They will even make a reference to Logos. And that was completely unexplained. So I'm going to explain it to you before he does. Because I think this is a part of, sometimes we have to, I use this analogy of when you're putting a jigsaw puzzle together, there's a reason why they printed on the box what it's supposed to look like. Because sometimes we need, this is 3 horses, not 2 horses, or, I think it's supposed to be a bell tower. Like, it helps guide you through putting the puzzle pieces together. So Logres will be alluding to the almost Platonic ideal of Britain, that there is an essence to a nation that could be personified by a particular time period or a particular legend or a particular way of thinking. This is the way that I think I might be able to explain it in a way that's a little more apprehendable. Other places in the world, when they describe America, how would they do that? So we can talk about, contemporary political issues or whatever, but for a long, long time, it was bits and pieces of either Americana or pop culture. Blue jeans, Coca-Cola, rock and roll, that there was something about a nation that could be described in these essential terms. What is quintessentially American? Baseball and apple pie, that kind of stuff.
Cowboys, Texas.
Cowboys, Uncle Sam, bald eagles. These are things that in almost a legendary fashion express something about America, even if it's not really practically true, but about its essence. The Declaration of Independence, 4th of July. These are things that the concept of the Platonic ideal is what we see in our material world is actually a reflection and a copy of what exists within the mind of God perfectly and eternally. The book of Hebrews does a lot of explanation in a very similar fashion, talking about the temple being an earthly copy of a heavenly temple and Christ's body being representative of that. And anyway, a lot of this jives very well with the philosophy of the Greek philosopher Plato, who, this world is temporary. We all see that. We all know that there will come a time where the table that we're sitting at will decay and crumble, but we can identify it as a table, even though it's not eternal. Why? Because there's something about this table that speaks to us as table. Even if this one table is ever destroyed, as we know that one day it's going to get thrown in the garbage or it's going to fall to pieces or whatever it is, there's an essence about it that we can recognize as table. And we can look at a different table that's made of wood instead of plastic, and it's got 3 legs instead of 4, and it's round instead of rectangular, but something in our mind says table. How? Why? Plato would say that there is something essential about that object that we perceive at some level as table, no matter what the outward appearances happen to be. He suggests that the way we were able to do that mentally is because we have been built to respond to the fact that there is an eternity out there where things don't break or fade or destroy, just like Jesus is saying, put your treasure in heaven where no moth or rust will consume. That even Plato, pagan philosopher, says that we are able to connect with the world and understand it at any level, even as changeable as it is, because we were built by the eternal. And in the eternal, the essence of what makes a thing truly a thing always is there forever. And so we make a connection, even if we don't understand it, if we don't really perceive it, can articulate it, because we've been built by God. And the essence of what makes a thing has been designed by God eternally and not by us. What makes Britain Britain? When we read Shakespeare, and he talks about England, about this native land and this soil, this England. It's capturing something that transcends a particular generation and says, what is it about this place and this people that is unique and important? What makes England, England? What makes France, France? What makes China, China? What makes America, America? Logos, then, is the ancient and really eternal vision of Britain. What makes Britain, Britain? That is exemplified in a land that has maybe never really existed called Logos. Now, if we were talking about America, we would be talking about a Wild West town where everybody wore jeans and ate apple pie, and the mayor was Uncle Sam, and every day was the 4th of July. And as silly as that sounds, it would kind of exemplify all those individual myths and legends that seem particular to America and kind of coalesce them into one vision. And so this is Logos. And even if it's been legendary, it's been connected to King Arthur. There's something about the Arthurian legend that even centuries after the fact makes England feel like England and not like France and not like Russia and not like Nigeria. So Lewis is basically writing that we feel that way because it's actually true. The myth is true. That there was either a time and a place, or there is something eternal in the mind of God. That Arthurian England is actually the purest form of what makes England, England. And the leader, the king of Logos, is Ransom, who is now explicitly named by McPhee as Elwin Ransom, and he recounts the stories that kind of relate to the first 2 books. And even Jane has heard of him before as an academic. And that's kind of where we're getting to. A lot of this is going to now start shifting from the particularities of early 1950s England into the philosophical ideal of what humanity ought to be. And that is exemplified in all things of this little household with this oddball mix of weird people and a bear. And yet there is something about that communicates the essence of what makes England, England, what makes Britain, Britain, and what makes humanity, humanity. And the nice represents the exact opposite. Exterminate the living, destroy the organic with machines. The disembodied mind will conquer all and live forever. And the crazy thing is, they have dropped all pretense of trying to pull Mark into, oh, you're doing a great work on behalf of the nation, on behalf of humanity. We're all about scientific progress. At some point, they went from 0 to 60 and said, hey, do you want to see the disembodied head of an executed criminal? Because he's really our leader. What? And Mark is so over his head at this point, he doesn't know what to do other than say, okay. It is mentioned that we've moved from a governmental quasi-corporation bureaucracy to this transhumanistic, destroy all plants and animals and enslave all humanity so that a singular mind can absorb everything and live forever. And these technocrats, these, we're the best and the brightest of world leaders and of our innovations and technologies are beyond everyone else. And they are literally bowing down to a head that's being suspended and connected to tubes and wires and is being artificially kept alive, if it even is alive.
Literally.
So again, sorry, the Zoom seems to be acting up a little bit. Okay, hopefully we're okay. This is where this is where the theological and philosophical thrust of the work is really starting to come to the forefront. Jane is now a definite part of the group at St. Anne's, and she is deeply embedded within the drama. Now, they are excluding her from some of their discussions, but they're being real clear. The reason we're keeping you out is not because we don't trust you, not because you're not one of us, because now you are. It seems like everyone's sort of saying, you're one of us. However, your visions, we're not sure what they mean. And as we're trying to figure it out, we don't want to put thoughts in your head where you start interpreting it based off of what we're thinking rather than what the vision is actually showing you. So we need to keep those visions kind of pure for now. So as we talk about what you tell us, just step out of the room and then we'll come back in later. So we have now one of the mechanical parts of this book that might be challenging is these subsections of every chapter, right? Because we've had like 4 and 5 subs, like chapter 1 has some, subsection 1, subsection 2. A lot of that has been because we've had the 2 protagonists. Let's go look at Jane over here. Let's go watch Mark over there. This still exists, but I'm telling you that these worlds are shifting closer and closer together, and they will collide. So, as we are shifting back and forth, we ought to see almost the purest forms of these 2 separate entities. What's happening at Nice will get as dark as it possibly can, and it's getting dark fast. And what's happening at St. Anne's will get as bright as it possibly can. Now, where and when the 2 coincide and meet and even conflict, we haven't seen yet. As a matter of fact, McPhee's pretty annoyed that the director Ransom's plan is, to him, seems like no plan. How are we going to defeat? You say this is a battle for humanity, and I'm going to win that. We're going to win that by growing vegetables and hanging out in this manner and taking in people one at a time like stray cats. Didn't make any sense. But again, Ransom is basically saying, no, our job is obedience. We don't have to understand it, but we ought to be faithful to it. Sometimes it's not about doing, won't someone do anything? Won't someone do something? Well, maybe it's the time to not do something. Rather to be patient than to mess things up or make things worse. That's the old Reagan line about the most feared statement. I'm here from the government and I'm here to help. Our desire to do something good, if we do the wrong thing, if we make the wrong choice, can actually make a bad situation much worse. So that, what Ransom knows from now is we have to wait, be patient, be faithful. Something is happening, and when we're supposed to act, we'll know. And Jane's going to be a part of that. Her visions are going to be a part of how we'll know. But we have to be obedient and patient. And that is, not easy to do. But if this is a Christian community, if this is what kind of like this inspiration, what things ought to be like, patience is a virtue, not just as a stock phrase. That is a literal Christian virtue. It is a fruit of the Spirit to be patient. So, a battle against the powers and principalities of this world will not be won by swords, will not be won by guns or great armies. If the battle is the Lord's, then it's not going to be up to us to figure it all out and go by the sweat of our brow or the force of our hands to make it happen, unless, of course, it's supposed to at the right time. So that's kind of where we are with this. A new part of the plan has been revealed or is starting to work. And again, Jane is at the heart of it. Her visions are now being given some concrete explanations. The creepy thing is we've gotten confirmation from the other side that guy, I think, was it Winter? The guy with the goatee and the little glasses, he was really invading Jane's mind from afar. Her visions of him being around, he really was trying to act like this, whatever weird telepathy power is going on seems to be true. But now that is blocked off. So the vision, some of the last visions that she had are now being given explanations, and it seems to be now is the time to act. They are going to go back to Bragdon Wood because the old stories are actually true. Legends and myths and little fairy tales that we've heard bits and pieces of since we were kids. What if, in the essential truth of England, of Britain, this was all actually true? There's a great little line from the when they rebooted the Star Wars movies, the sequel trilogy several years back. It's neat to see like all these old stars come back and like, oh, it's Han Solo again for the first time in 30 years. And he's telling the new stars who are like, it can't really be true. Like these stories we've heard about, Luke Skywalker and the Force and all this kind of stuff. And we get Han Solo, who was in the 80s and then the 70s, like, he's a smuggler with a heart of gold. And like, I don't believe in all these wizards and mumbo jumbo. And now he's telling this new generation about the Force. He says, it's true. All of it. It's true. The Arthurian legends are true. We have to get to Bragdon Wood because your vision has been of Merlin and his body is under the ground waiting to be found. Who will find him first? Because Nice is after him too. Now, what in the world does Nice want with the body of Merlin, the dang wizard? But that's where we are. Because the myths and the legends are true. This is deep in the heart of a philosophical and a theological principle of both Lewis and Tolkien. Again, being such world-class experts in the English language, both of them, just in different ways. Understanding words that we use in kind of just common ways, but they have very specific and technical meanings. And for both of them, a very significant word in the Christian faith is the word myth. We hear myth and we think fiction. We think fairy tale. We think make-believe and not true. That's not what a myth is, not technically. That is the common use of the word. For something to be a myth, it is about something giving an explanation to a fundamental truth of life. That's what a myth is. Now, a lot of myths are untrue fairy tales. But just because something is a myth, it doesn't, by definition, in a technical sense, mean that it's not true. It just means that it's a story intended to convey a fundamental truth of humanity. So when we say the creation myth, lots of cultures have creation myths. Oh, the world was created when this god had sex with this god, and the offspring was the world, whatever. The creation myth of the Bible is, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. To call it a myth is to not put it on par with the other story and say they're both equally false, they're both equally make-believe. It is to say they both equally seek to explain a fundamental reality of human life. How did we get here? How does life exist? How is there anything instead of nothing? It does not say, just by calling it a myth, if it's true or not. There are myths that are false and fake, and there are myths that are true. And both Tolkien and Lewis, again, this is using very technical language. This is not how we use the word myth. I don't use the word myth like this because I use it like normal people use it. But the experts in the language would say, no, the gospel is a myth. You're saying there was no... No, it is an explanation about a fundamental aspect of life. It's true. The gospel is the true myth that all the other myths of the world either have a bit and piece of or are trying to come up with an explanation because they don't know the truth. So the myth of the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table and Merlin the Wizard and all this kind of stuff, at least some part of it is actually true. And there's an importance to that, which stretches beyond the concept of the Arthurian story. And Lewis will always be connecting to our humanity and God's plan for the world. That the gospel is the true myth, like myth with a capital M, that explains the fundamental reality of life. It just happens to do so in a way that is accurate and faithful and true. So having these understandings is my hope of helping you put pieces together as we read more. Again, he's trusting us to follow him, and if we are getting lost, to at least hang on, grab hold and get dragged along until we get the chance to get back on our feet. A lot of things are going to get explained in a lot of detail that hasn't happened yet, and I don't want you to get discouraged like, oh my gosh, he just keeps throwing words out. I have no idea where this is going. Well, part of that's on purpose. He doesn't want you to know where this is going yet.
You did a good job.
If it came out of nowhere that you were going to meet the disembodied head of an executed criminal,
Yeah.
well, guess what? That's not the weirdest thing that's going to happen.
Oh, no, don't tell me.
So
We thought that was weird enough.
yeah, it is weird. But that is all part of a larger plan. This is the battle for humanity that is happening with the powers and principalities of the world, beyond people fighting, beyond governments. This is light versus dark. This is good versus evil. This is the devil versus the armies of God. And we are now starting to see the mask slip and the truth come to light. Any further questions on 8 and 9? Any like little things that popped up or issues, or I don't know what that meant?
No, because I had some questions and you answered.
All right. All right. That's the goal. That's the goal. Okay. So we are going to take a big chunk next time, and we're going to go 4 chapters. So that means 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. So this way we're going to be able to end everything in just 2 more weeks, but we will take a big chunk. I think the chunk, though it's a lot to take in, I think the chunk will work. Because again, the narrative, as it accelerates, you almost don't want to stop, because not only do you want to see what happens next, it will make more sense the deeper it goes. So like a lot of things in life, the only way out is through. And so we are going to keep going deeper and deeper. But I really am convinced there is something very profound and very deeply satisfying at the end of all this. All right.
I have one question.
Yes.
When he was referring to, like being, they were actually talking about going out of the world, like
Yes.
Venice.
That's in the first two books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first book is Mars, and the second book is Venus.
Venice. Anyway, and then they talk about I'm not saying it's right, Edelios.
Eldials. So the Eldials, again, if we had spent time together reading the first book in particular, but the Eldials are these spiritual forces. Now, an Eldial is basically a spiritual being of any sort.
Yeah.
We might think about angels. God is referred to as Meleldil, the great spirit. But some of the spirits seem to be small and have minor functions. Some of the spirits are very significant and have great responsibilities. And we might liken them scripturally to angels, archangels, and principalities. That there is some kind of heavenly hierarchy that we get bits and pieces and hints of. Even stuff like reading through the book of Revelation, like we just did earlier in the year. But that there is a spiritual world all around us that we don't perceive, or we rarely do. And Ransom has been in contact with the Eldial of various sorts ever since that first book. And that's what's helping guide him as basically the king of Logres. The truth that has come out through the nice side of things is they believe in Eldils too. Because not just because something's a spirit doesn't make it good.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes
The devil is a spirit,
Yeah.
but he's not on our side.
Gotcha.
He's on his own side. Now,
Okay.
like almost all evil, evil believes itself to be good. It's rarely like the mustachio twirling villain. Ha ha ha! I'm going to torment you just to torment you. Typically, they have a sense of I am doing what is right. Even in the first two books, especially when we meet Weston and Divine, who is actually Feverstone. They have this. It's a warped sense of morality, but there's a morality to it. Weston, even though he is killing and destroying sentient beings on Mars and intends to conquer and enslave them for his own purposes, his goal, at least in his own mind, is something positive. This is how humanity will survive. Eventually, the earth will become too crowded or too polluted or too old. The only way for humanity to survive is to expand beyond the stars, and you got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. So in order for humanity to survive, which is a good, I will do these other things, whether you call them bad or not. I'm kind of beyond your sense of good and bad because my aims are so pure and so noble. In order to preserve humanity, I will exterminate you all. Like that's crazy. That's diabolical. But it's convinced itself that it's doing right. So, even these awful and bizarre things that are happening on the nice end of things, they are absolutely and positively convinced. Not that they're good. They would say that we're beyond good and bad. There's a deeper truth beyond good and bad, but they feel like we are going towards what is the right thing to do, which is destroy all organic life, clean and sterilize everything so that the one disembodied mind can rule over all. What's the one disembodied mind that's going to rule over all? It's the devil.
Yeah.
Right? So that's a hint for the future.
Okay.
Okay?
Mhm.
We good?
Okie dokie.
All right. Thank you.